The Pastor's Heart and Dominic Steele here, and thanks very much for joining us. An extra edition this week on calculating your church capacity with the COVID-19 limits and restarting public gatherings. Our guest today, Bishop Michael Stead. We're live on Facebook, and so if you do have a question for Michael, then put your comments in the comments below. But before we come to Michael Stead, we'd appreciate it if you could share this episode of The Pastor's Heart with friends on social media or with ministry peers so that they might benefit as well. And if you were able to help us out financially with The Pastor's Heart, then that would be great. I'm so encouraged by the response of a number of people on this, but we're not quite there yet. And if you're able to go to www.patreon.com/thepastorsheart and perhaps to help us out by $5 or $10 a month, that would be terrific in terms of us covering the costs of the little team who put this together. Now, Michael Stead, thanks for coming in.
It's a pleasure, Dominic.
Michael Stead, Bishop of South Sydney, Bishop of Tessalons.
Yeah, I've become the Bishop of Hexagons. Who knew? It's a new title.
After our discussion a couple of weeks ago, you got teased a bit about that. But you went through a whole lot of detail about the way we needed to think about church buildings and church building size, and it was super helpful, and then the government's changed it.
Changed, but in helpful ways for us.
Yes.
So they've actually made a very significant change in the way that we calculate floor space. Previously, it was based on a single undivided room where you were seating people, and that really limited down how many people you could put in church.
And in the conventional way of thinking about it, it was really just the place that the pews were.
That's right. In the old language, it was the nave. Where you sat the people was where you had to have the space. Now they've changed the definition to say it's in the publicly available floor space of a room.
And I'm getting the sense that that's to bring it into line with the other restaurants and other public spaces.
That's right. So pretty much the same rules for pubs and clubs. And so you could now count the kitchen, for example, and
so in a pub and club, when they're thinking floor space, they're counting the kitchen as part of the floor space.
That's right.
And so what parts of I'm trying to think, what parts of a church can I count when I'm doing that? Everyone's doing floor space calculations.
Yeah. Okay, so we've asked the government specifically these questions, and they said it's publicly accessible spaces. They said that doesn't include storerooms or rooms with a closed door where there's no airflow. So if you think about it practically, it's the places where you've got common airflows, because that's where these aerosol particles are going to be distributed to. The bigger the airspace that people are moving around in, the more the aerosol particles can disperse, and they want 4 square metres per person.
So if we think about it in terms of the building you and I are sitting in, the church here at Village in Annandale, we're sitting in the morning tea space.
That's right.
This means the morning tea space and the foyer space, because air flows between.
Yeah, people are going to be moving in and out of those spaces.
I'm getting a breeze from the auditorium where I'm sitting.
You've got, people can't see this, but you've got doors between where we are now and the church space. People are going to be moving backwards and forwards. There's air flows in and out. So this is going to be part of that, the floor space of this area. So you'd be able to include that in calculating your 4 square metres.
So it brings a whole lot more people in for most churches. Most churches would perhaps have, I don't know, a quarter, a third more floor space in that.
Yep, absolutely. Based from the old calculation where you weren't allowed to include the chancel and you couldn't include the foyer and all the other parts of the floor space, now they're included.
Now, in New South Wales, I watched a little debate between you and one of our legal friends, Neil Foster, who's a genius in these areas. And you were saying letter of the law. There was one, and spirit of the law is a different one. Give us the spirit of the law.
To be clear, Neil Foster is absolutely right. The current version of the public health orders do not have a mandated 4 square metres per person for public religious gatherings. It is there for private religious gatherings. But my view is that I think this is probably a drafting oversight, and this is not a time to exploit that loophole.
No.
Everywhere else, all the other premises.
And you would expect that the next revision of that will tidy that mistake up.
That's right. All of the other premises that are out there are subject to that same rule, 4 square metres per person. We should operate with that as a rule, even if it's not technically the rule of law at the moment.
Now, let's just whip around the country of Australia. You showed me a table, we might pop that up on the screen, of the way things are looking across the country. You just want to quickly whip through this for me?
Yeah, I think the thing to focus on is particularly on the last line, because it shows that New South Wales is really ahead of the curve in in terms of churches for public gatherings. You might remember when the federal government announced the 3-step roadmap, it was very much 10, then 20, and then 100. We've gone straight from 10 basically to 50. Yep. Everybody else is still gone 10 to 20. So everybody else is still in what was the traditional stage 2. New South Wales is ahead of that curve.
Now, we're talking about 50 in New South Wales, 20 in the rest of the country.
Yep.
What's the movement that you're expecting in the next month? Because, I mean, for some of us, 50 is not that helpful.
Yep.
Yeah.
The government's told us it's very much a wait and see as to what happens to the rate of community infection as a result of this change from 10 to 50. If there's a whole wave of infections both in pubs and clubs or in churches or both, then they'll either stick at 50 or they'll wind it back because 50 was obviously too much. The best case scenario for us is that we have a period of time, maybe 3 or 6 weeks, and there's no significant community-to-community transmission through increased social gatherings in churches and in clubs. And if that's the case, then the most likely scenario is that we then move to the next step, which will probably be the 100. I don't think it's not going to go 50,
it's not going to go 300. No. A couple of concerns.
Yep.
On Monday, I went across the road to the Annandale North Hotel, and we love the guys at the Annandale North Hotel. But I was talking to the manager, the licensee there, and he said they've got 50 in the front restaurant, 50 in the back restaurant, and 20 in the pokies. So under the current guidelines, he's got 120 on the site across the road, which is smaller than our church, and we've got 50.
Yep.
Come on.
Yeah. So the answer is that is quite specifically hardwired into the latest release in the public health order. That is, it says that pubs and clubs, if they've got discrete meeting areas, provided each of those meeting areas fits the 4 square metre rule, so he must have a room that's big enough to have 50 people in it, but provided you've got those separate areas and you don't have interchange between the 2 areas, and it is a separate room, he can quite legitimately do that. The concern with churches is that we don't have that kind of spatial separation.
But we do in terms of the kids' ministry in one hall and the church building in another.
Yeah, it's what happens before and after. So it's the parents who then go and pick up the kids, or the kids who run in and have morning tea. If there was a way...
But I walked to the restaurant in the back area and back out to the front area.
That's the argument of the government at the moment is that for pubs and clubs it is much more discreet. They still have rules, even though he can have 50 people in a one room, he can't have a group of more than 10. And so the idea is, okay, you've got 10 people who are all sitting together in a corner and they might be breathing and infecting each other, and that's okay. It's when you have not just those 10 people interacting within themselves within a small group of 50, but you actually have a mass of people who are interacting across the same space. Even if you only have 50 here and 50 there at any one point in time, if they're moving backwards and forwards, you've got the possibility of a much greater cross-infection.
So the best hope I've got for... it seems to me that the issue of 100 for the site, for many of us, that's not going to be enough,
No. And we're continuing to talk to the government about that, and particularly we want to be able to say, look, if we do have separate spaces on the site where you've literally got the hall and it's discontiguous with the church, and we can have a way of putting the kids' ministry in the hall and keeping that separate from the church completely, and parents drop the kids off there, they come around to church, they do church, they come back, pick up the kids, go home. That would be much more like the pubs and clubs analogy, and that's what we're talking to the government about, is where you have separate spaces on one site, can we call that a place of worship, and this is another place of worship, and we can have two things running side by side. I think that there's more likelihood that the government will say yes to that.
Right, and you're engaged in talks along those lines?
That's right, but we're not there yet. And at the moment, the concern is you're still going to have this interchange of, if you have kids ministry here and adults here, backwards and forwards, where ultimately we're still going to have 100 people interacting on one site. Okay,
4 square metres. How long are we going to have 4 square metres? Because I'm getting a little bit of a whisper that, and I'm keen to be corrected, that we might get the limits of size gatherings increase, but stay at 4 square metres for quite a long time.
Yeah, our best guess is that the 4 square metre rule will probably be tied to the 100-person limit. So step 3 was 100 persons, but it was still spaced at 4 square metres. It would only be the step after that, which nobody is really putting a timetable on, which is probably 500 people. That's the point at which it's just not practical to have a 4 square metre rule, because there are so few venues where you could have 500 people at 4 square metres. But until we get to that stage, and nobody knows when that is, we're probably going to be stuck at 4 square metres. And as I said, I think that will still be the rule when we get to 100 persons.
So are you thinking that the Rugby League, talking about crowds for the grand final, are whistling in the wind?
Yeah. I can't see 10 or 20,000 people in a stadium this side of Christmas. I'd love to be wrong, and I would be. The thing that would change all of that is if we get to the stage where there are so few cases of active COVID-19 out there in the community that it becomes statistically very unlikely that you can have anybody in a group of 10,000 people who's infected. I mean, at the moment in New South Wales, I think there are about 250 still active cases, and we're getting a handful, single digits of new infections each day. If that gets down so small, like it is in the Northern Territory, where they haven't had a new case for 30 days, and at that point, you could probably think that we go back to life as normal. I think we're still a long way off from life as normal.
Right. So you're saying you think stage 3, best guess, till Christmas?
Yeah, I think we could get to stage 3 in maybe as little as 3 weeks, maybe as much as 6 weeks. Nobody's putting a time on it at the moment, but I think we'll get to stage 3 relatively soon. And I think
so kind of mid-July.
And I think that'll probably be 100, and that's predicated on we have a period of time where there's no significant community-based infections with the 50 rule that we've got at the moment.
It's just, in terms of my own decision-making process, I'm thinking, if stage 3 lasts a short time, I'll make one call in terms of congregational structure.
Yep.
If it lasts a long time, I'll make a different call in terms of congregational structure. But your best advice for me is 6 months stage 3.
Yeah, my conservative advice, and as I said, I'm happy, I would love to be wrong, but my conservative advice is make plans around having the 100 limit up until Christmas time.
Right. Okay. Good. All right.
or not good, as the case may be.
That's right. Droplets and singing and things.
That's the other thing to be thinking about in your planning is I'd expect not to be doing vigorous congregational singing for a while, and that's because of the possible risk factors out there. Singing is right at the top of the list.
Now what we're going to do is we're going to play a little video that Michael's actually put me onto, and it's actually a little video explaining the way the droplets project when we sing. Now, this is a segment of the Pastor's Heart that is really only going to make sense if you're watching us. And so if you're listening to us on the audio, it'd be really good to hop over and watch this little video. I think it's such a significant little video that you'll want to share it with your congregation members, and so really worth popping over and watching it. So just go to thepastorsheart.net to see this.
So this is a picture of a person just going through a scale, do, re, mi, etc. So it's not singing as vigorously as a choir singer would. So they're just standing in the lab. So what Prateek, our student, has done is he's developed this method of visualising the droplets produced during speaking, sneezing, coughing, etc. So he's applied it to a person going through a scale. And down the bottom left, you can see the notes that he's conveniently put there. And it's using this very intense light source that we use in supersonic wind tunnels. And we've purposed it for this study. But anyway, I'll play it. So that's do. You can see the droplets forming. And some notes have produced less. So you can see those droplets form. Some of the big ones just fall down immediately, but the smaller ones just fly around the room. Bar's particularly bad. You can see. So this method picks up a lot of the droplets, but there's still aerosol that gets produced as well that we can't see. A lot of these droplets are, they're staying suspended like an aerosol would. Going back down the scale. The far's particularly bad. Okay.
Con, could I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Because it would seem that the consonant had something to bear there as well.
Yes.
That with far, it's probably more the F than it is the vowel sound, and the do seemed to have a different pattern depending on where it was.
Exactly, yeah.
In the range. So there's obviously some other factors coming into play here as well.
Oh, it's incredibly complicated physics that goes on. It depends how much fluid is in your mouth, and then the way the air pushes through your mouth and shears the liquid, and as it comes out, it produces droplets of different sizes. So it really depends on how much air you're pushing out, how quickly, and how much fluid you have in your mouth when you do it, the shape of your mouth, where your tongue is. It's incredibly complicated.
But I'm also wondering if potentially, and not ideal for choral directors at all, but as a start, if a choir started rehearsing using humming rather than singing lots of text and kind of separating, maybe speaking through text and learning their parts humming with closed mouths, whether that would greatly reduce the risk.
Well, I think that's a great idea. I think that's, that would close off the source of the droplets and aerosol.
Yes, and I think that's backed up by what you just showed us too, because the ones that started with the M, and I think this was also the case with the L from what we saw, there seemed to be less actually coming out of the mouth with the and the L.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah. Yeah,
and we'll never be able to sing F words starting with F ever again. Eliminated from the repertoire.
Exactly.
That's from a Gondwana choir, a webinar from probably last week, and we want to credit them and thank them for that really, really helpful logic there in terms of us understanding the way droplets work.
Yes, and quite distressing when you think about how many droplets are normally coming out, because you couldn't see any of those droplets normally, but that's just there in normal singing.
And so I find that quite persuasive and very interesting to see the different sounds.
Yeah.
And the F's.
Particularly because F is aspirated, so you're using the air from the lungs to push out the sound, and so that's why you're getting a lot of droplet spread every time you're pronouncing an F.
So we've got to lose how deep the Father's
Father's love is right out of there.
And that's the oceans. Your feet may fail, and I find you in the mystery.
And there my faith will stand. Yes, so that's all out.
That's gone.
Yeah.
Okay. When does that change?
That changes when there's significantly reduced risks of community infection. So at the point where we can breathe on each other and not be worried because there basically aren't infected people in our building, that's when it becomes safe to sing again. So again, it's probably going to be when we get to the 500 limit, when it's safe for football crowds to yell and cheer and support their team and spit beer all over each other, that's the time when it's okay for us to sing again.
Now, we were talking about this morning. I was explaining to you that one of my strategies has been just to, at the moment, think my primary audience on Sunday are the people I'm speaking to through the camera at the moment, and then we've just had the little brainwave that we want to start getting people used to coming back onto the site. And so last Sunday morning we had 10 people gathered in the front cafe watching church on the screen. So not in the auditorium where we were producing the streamed event, but watching it, and just it gets us to test out our safety procedures, gets us to because we don't want to go from 0 to 100 in 6 weeks' time. And so over the next few weeks, being allowed to have 50 on site, we're going to have 50 in the front 2 rooms in watch parties.
Yeah.
But we had a little hiccup on Sunday morning that we said on the stream, stand up wherever you are in your lounge rooms, belt it out, because of course you can sing at home.
Yeah.
And so the group in the front cafe stood up and we, oh no!
Yeah. And I think that's going to be one of the real challenges. I love singing, and for me to stand in church while the music is playing and somebody is singing and just hum along, it's going to take all my willpower to do it.
I found the difference, I mean, later in the service, because when we got it wrong in the first song, we then got it right in the subsequent songs. I found, okay, the first thing is to stay sitting down. Do you know, actually, if I'm staying sitting down, then I'm not. The next thing was actually just to think, it is okay to hum under my breath, and it is okay to, how do you feel about just gently, when I survey?
Again, because I think it's going to be hard to control people. Once you start vocalising and you start producing with the mouth open, it's going to be very hard to control, to resist the temptation to sing at normal level. I think humming is fine. So that's what we're encouraging people is basically if you keep your lips together, you can't produce that many droplets and the amount of aerosols that are coming out of the rest of your body.
Give me the distinction between droplets and aerosols, because I've heard that language around the place. Yeah.
So droplets are things which are heavier than air, and that means, and that's what we were seeing on those videos, which are the particles which, because
you're talking to someone, you just see a little bit of spittle come out of your mouth.
Yeah, and what we saw in the video, you ordinarily wouldn't see them. They're actually much smaller than that, but they use technology to make them visible. But yes, but there are heavier than air particles, and as you saw on the video, they basically come out of your mouth and then they go down, and the heavier the particles are, the further and more quickly they fall. Yep. Those kind of particles aren't going to hang around in the air for that long. They're the things that are going to end up on the pew next to you, which is why we need to...
And they've got to be wiped down between surfaces.
That's why we need to wipe down the pews.
We'll come to pews in a moment.
Yeah. Aerosol is different. So aerosol is lighter than air, and that means that those particles are basically going to circulate in the body of the building, and that's why the government's so concerned about this 4 square metres, because it's actually about having cubic capacity of air in the room. The bigger the room, the more those airborne particles, which will remain airborne for a long time, are going to remain circulating in that space.
So it's actually, I mean, it's a bit of a pain. It's winter. We want it to be warm. Yeah. But actually, the more kind of air from the outside and air from other rooms circulating through, the better.
Absolutely. The best case scenario, if you wanted to do multiple services, would be to open up all the windows and have a strong cross breeze between services. So
sounds freezing.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking, but that means that what you've got is a fresh air in the building when the next lot of people come in, rather than recycling all of those airborne particles which are already there from the last service.
Right. So actually, I think one of the checklist items had move people out as soon as possible, but its real goal was to move into fresh air as soon as possible rather than leave. So it wasn't actually an anti-community strategy, anti-relationship strategy. It was aerosol droplet strategy.
Yeah, that's right. If we had a way of refreshing the air in the building, like humongous fans that could pump air in and out, it wouldn't matter about moving the people. It's about actually moving the air. But we don't have the technology to do that.
Back to droplets. I'm sitting on a chair. There's some droplet. Well, actually, chairs are better than pews.
Chairs are better than pews.
Why are chairs better than pews?
Just it's easier to clean them.
And you only need to clean a little bit of it, not the whole. You don't have to, because people are going to be only sitting in one little bit because they've got to be spaced out.
Yeah. Whereas with a pew, you really have to have a team of people who are going to come and wipe down at the surface of every pew after use.
And we've still got the issue of how far apart we sit from each other, haven't we?
Yeah, that's right. So we're still required to sit 1.5 metres between persons, and that's over and above the 4 square metre rule for the floor space of the property.
Now, you did a little diagram that will pop up on the screen of, well, tell me about this.
So this is why they're teasing me, or the bishops are teasing me because of my tessellated hexagons. But this is basically how to work out the amount of space you need to put around a person assuming that you've got a flexible floor space where you can seat chairs.
Yep.
And the best way to do that is by offsetting people, and the way to do it mathematically is to kind of imagine an overlay of hexagons over your floor space. Mm-hmm. And if you imagine a hexagon where the distance from the person at the centre to the outside vertice is 75 centimetres to that, or 87 centimetres to the vertice, that will ensure that people are spaced out at appropriate distance. Right.
So pews are actually super unhelpful.
They are, because they're not spaced conveniently, and it means that you either have, if a typical pew is about 3 foot point to point, so it's 92 centimetres between pews, that's not enough to get 1.5 metres social distancing. So you either have to leave every second pew blank, but then you've actually got 1.8 metres between people, so that's too much. Or else what you have to do is you have to put people in the second pew offset at a particular distance, so that you get the direct distance head to head is sufficiently apart.
I don't think pews are part of the future of evangelical churches in Australia, and it feels to me this is a moment for churches to address this issue.
Yes, we haven't yet had a flood of faculties about pew removal yet.
It seems to me there's two ways you could do it. I mean, obviously different denominations will have different issues, but in the Anglican Church, to move something like a pew, you're supposed to put in a faculty, which when we got rid of all of our pews here, we went through a process of putting in a faculty. People could raise objections. But what a great argument for getting rid of pews. We can actually fit enough people in the church building. But could one just put them in storage for 6 months, as opposed to formally removing them? We'll just put them in storage to get through this crisis, kind of as a trial. Do you know, that may be a way?
Yeah, that might be something worth considering, yeah.
Right. I've got some questions on Facebook. No congregational singing till Christmas, we've done that one. Temperature checks at the start of church.
At the moment, if it was practical to do that, that would be a good thing to do. The problem is that people who are already infected in some cases are not yet symptomatic anyway. So even if we're doing the temperature checking, we're not going to pick up people who are asymptomatic, infected but asymptomatic at this point in time. So it's probably not going to be any more effective than what we are encouraging, which is, again, what the guidelines, the government's guidelines to us were, have strong warnings to people at the door to say, if you are at all feeling unwell, please go home and join us online. Don't come inside. That we've been advised that that's probably going to be just as effective as any other methods at this point in time.
What are the other questions people are putting to you at the moment? Because, we had a ministers' meeting this morning here with 15 or so ministers. And,
I am getting a lot of questions which are about pushing the limits a little bit. They're saying, well, it's 50 people plus those people who are necessary for running the service. So if I designate my 2 Bible readers and my ushers and this and this and this...
Sound desk and a screen person, and a guitarist.
I could get up to 70 people, and I want to push back and say, this is not the moment to try and push that envelope. This is the moment to say, like, if anything, the New South Wales government has been generous, more so than other states. They're trusting us when we're saying we're going to be really responsible about this. We're going to take extra care. We care about the people who are coming to our churches, and we are going to be vigilant. Now's not the time to push those to stretch that envelope.
And it seems to me that you could get away with it. I mean, nobody's going to shoot you.
That's right.
But if you had a COVID outbreak, the reputational damage amongst your community, your immediate church family, and the wider suburb, and the city and the state would all be catastrophic.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you followed the guidelines, then actually you've covered your back.
That's right. Yeah. So what we're saying to churches is, even though the COVID-19 safety plan is recommended for churches, you should treat it as mandatory. Don't say, well, it's recommended so I don't have to do it. You say, this is me being a good social citizen. This is me looking after my congregation to the best of my ability. I'm going to do what the government's telling me to do.
Alrighty. Michael Stead, thanks very much for coming in.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Dominic.
My guest on The Pastor's Heart, Bishop Michael Stead, and it's been great to have your company today, and we'll look forward to your company next Tuesday afternoon at 2 on The Pastor's Heart.